Let's get started. Story number 1.
It started with a dare. Mark, a tech-savvy college sophomore, was known among his friends for his obsession with all things digital. He wasn't just curious about the internet. He was fascinated by its hidden corners, especially the notorious dark web. One Friday night, his roommate, Jason, casually dropped a challenge during a gaming session. "Bet you won't last an hour browsing the darkest sites," Jason taunted, leaning back in his chair. Mark's pride wouldn't let him back down. "Easy," he replied with a smirk. "You just watch." Jason didn't think much of it, tossing a beer can aside as Mark grabbed his laptop and activated his Tor browser. The room's dim glow cast shadows on the walls, giving an eerie backdrop to what was about to unfold. Mark navigated through the dark web with ease. It was mostly dull, illegally streamed movies, forums full of conspiracy theorists, and shady online markets. But then he stumbled across a link that caught his attention: The Silent Room. It had no description, just an ominous tagline: "Hear them whisper, but don't let them hear you." Jason, watching over his shoulder, scoffed. "Probably just some troll site. Go on, click it." Mark hesitated for a moment before pressing enter. The screen went black, then slowly faded to a live feed of a dark, empty room. It looked like an abandoned basement lit only by a flickering fluorescent bulb. The feed had a text chat below it, but unlike other dark web chats, there were no usernames, just messages popping up one by one. "Do you hear it?" one message asked. Mark typed a sarcastic reply. "Hear what?" Almost immediately, the screen flickered, and faint static began to echo through his speakers. Then, a faint whispering sound emerged, like dozens of overlapping voices. "Dude, this is just some audio loop," Jason muttered, though his voice betrayed unease. Mark turned up the volume. The whispers grew louder but remained incomprehensible, a cacophony of anguish and despair. As he leaned closer, trying to make out the words, one phrase broke through the noise. "He's watching you." Mark froze. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Jason shrugged. "Probably scripted. These things are all fake." Then the camera feed shifted. The dark room on screen zoomed out slightly, revealing a shadowy figure standing in the far corner. Its outline was blurry, but its movements were deliberate. It tilted its head as though studying the camera. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening now, and Mark's hands hovered over the keyboard. Another message appeared. "Don't acknowledge him." Mark's heart raced. Without thinking, he typed, "Who is he?" The feed distorted, and the figure moved closer. It didn't walk. It seemed to glide, growing more defined with every passing second. It was human-shaped but wrong. Its limbs elongated, its head disproportionately large, and its eyes, though hidden in shadow, felt piercing. Jason stood abruptly. "All right, man. Shut it off. This is too much." Mark's cursor moved to close the tab, but his hand trembled. The screen froze momentarily, and when it resumed, the figure was gone. Then came another message. "He's behind you." Both Mark and Jason turned instinctively. The room was empty. Jason laughed nervously. "Okay, enough. This is messing with my head." Mark wasn't laughing. "Just a prank site," he muttered, though his voice cracked. He closed the browser, shut his laptop, and forced a grin. "See? Nothing to it." But that night, the whispers didn't stop. Mark woke around 3 a.m. to the sound of faint static. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but when he sat up, his laptop was open, the screen glowing faintly. He was certain he'd turned it off. The browser was open to the Silent Room feed, but this time the camera angle had changed. It wasn't showing the dark basement anymore. It was showing Mark's dorm room. He stared at the screen, his blood turning to ice. The feed was live. He could see himself, sitting on the bed, wide-eyed and trembling. Behind him, in the corner of the room, was the shadowy figure, closer now, its head tilted just like before. Mark turned slowly. The corner was empty. He slammed the laptop shut and bolted out of the room, waking Jason. "Man, you're freaking out over nothing," Jason groaned, but followed him to the common area. The whispers followed them, faint at first, then growing louder. Jason heard them now, too. "Okay, seriously, what the hell is going on?" Mark stammered. "I don't know. It's not real. It can't be real." Jason snatched Mark's laptop and opened it. The screen was black now, reflecting their pale, terrified faces. Then, one word appeared in blood-red text. "Run." The whispers erupted into a deafening roar, and the shadowy figure materialized before them, no longer confined to the screen. It towered over them, its grotesque form now painfully vivid. It reached out a spindly hand and the room went dark. When campus security found their dorm the next morning, it was empty. Mark's laptop was smashed to pieces and the words "Do you hear it?" were scrawled on the walls in what appeared to be blood. Neither Mark nor Jason was ever seen again. Story the end.
Story number 2.
It started with a message on an encrypted forum Mark frequently visited. "Want to see something truly forbidden?" the anonymous post read. Below it was a link labeled simply Abyss Archive. Mark was no stranger to the dark web. A seasoned programmer and thrill seeker, he'd surfed through the strangest corners of the internet, hitman hoaxes, black markets, and bizarre forums that claimed to summon spirits. Most of it was garbage. Cheap scares designed for gullible users. But the Abyss Archive was different. There was no fanfare, no ominous skull graphics, no cheesy attempt to frighten. The link was clean, understated. It intrigued him. The site loaded faster than expected, revealing a minimalist black background and a single sentence in white text. "What is your greatest fear?" Mark smirked. "Okay, let's play along," he muttered to himself, typing "isolation." The screen flickered and a folder icon appeared, labeled with his name, Mark. His smirk faltered. It wasn't unusual for dark websites to pull metadata from browsers, but this felt specific. He clicked the folder. Inside were subfolders, each named after years of his life. 1998, 1999, 2000, all the way to the current year. "What the hell?" he whispered, his curiosity overpowering his unease. He opened the folder labeled 2005. Inside was a single video file titled Dad. His breath caught in his throat. That was the year his father died in a car accident. He hesitated, then double-clicked. The screen filled with grainy footage of a car swerving off a rainy highway and slamming into a tree. The camera angle was impossible, like it had been recorded from the sky. Mark coiled, his stomach turning. He hadn't seen his father's death. He'd only heard about it. But this was it. Exactly as his mom had described. How do they have this?" he muttered, his hands trembling as he closed the video. The whispers started then, faint like wind brushing through a distant field. He shook his head, trying to ignore it, and opened another folder. 2012. This one contained a photo titled Her. It was a picture of Sarah, his high school girlfriend. She was sitting on her bed, staring directly at the camera. The problem was, Mark had taken that picture. He recognized it. But this version was wrong. In this version, Sarah's face was subtly distorted, her eyes darker, her smile unnaturally wide, as though she was mid-laugh. Mark's chest tightened. "This isn't real," he said aloud, his voice cracking. The whispers grew louder. He backed out of the folder structure and tried to close the browser, but the screen froze. A message appeared. "Do you want to continue?" 2 buttons below it, yes and no. Mark clicked no. The screen went black. Then a new message appeared. "There is no exit." The whispering now morphed into voices. Multiple tones, overlapping and undulating. "Mark," they called, his name dragged out in a guttural hiss. He ripped the laptop cord from the wall, but the screen stayed on, glowing eerily. Panic set in as the voices intensified. The screen shifted, showing a live feed of his apartment. The angle was high, as if recorded from the ceiling. He saw himself sitting frozen on the couch, staring at the laptop. He glanced up at the corners of the room, but there was no visible camera. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" he yelled. The live feed zoomed in on him. On the screen, something moved behind his frozen figure, a dark shadow crawling out from the corner of the room, its limbs elongated, its movements jerky and unnatural. Mark spun around. There was nothing there. But when he looked back at the screen, the shadow was closer. Its featureless face turned toward the camera, as if staring directly at him. The laptop speakers crackled and a voice emerged, low and menacing. "Do you want to see how it ends?" Mark slammed the laptop shut and bolted from the apartment. He ran down the hall, his heart pounding in his chest. As he reached the stairwell, the lights flickered, plunging the building into darkness. Somewhere above him, the whispers returned, now loud and frantic. He scrambled down the stairs, gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. When he reached the lobby, the whispers stopped. He stood in silence, panting and drenched in sweat. The front door was locked. It had always been locked after midnight. He fumbled with the keypad but couldn't remember the code. Behind him, the whispers began again, now accompanied by soft footsteps. Mark didn't turn around. Instead, he banged on the door, screaming for help. The footsteps drew closer. He felt the air grow colder, the sound of his breathing amplified in his ears. The last thing he saw was his own reflection in the glass door, wide-eyed with terror, and the dark figure looming over him, its mouth opening impossibly wide. When the landlord entered Mark's apartment the next morning, he found the laptop still glowing on the table. The screen displayed a single line of text: "What is your greatest fear? Mark was never seen again." Story the end.
Story number 3.
Evan was a late-night coder who thrived on caffeine, curiosity, and a fascination with the unexplored. By day, he worked as a software developer, debugging mundane lines of code for an insurance company. But by night, his passions shifted. He delved into the internet's darkest recesses, the places most wouldn't dare venture. It wasn't about illegal markets or conspiracy forums for him. It was the thrill of finding the unexplained. Urban legends, lost websites, forgotten horrors. One Friday evening, after hours of scrolling through dark web forums, a user named VoidSeeker87 posted something that caught Evan's attention. "Have you heard of the Ghost Registry?" the post read. Beneath it, a simple message: "For those brave enough, it connects you to them." Evan raised an eyebrow. "Them?" he muttered, intrigued but skeptical. Clicking the post revealed a single Tor link with a warning: "Proceed with caution. Once you're in, there's no going back." Curiosity won over caution. Evan copied the link into his Tor browser, and the site loaded slowly, almost as if it were reluctant to reveal itself. The homepage was black, adorned with archaic text that read, "The Ghost Registry. Speak to the forgotten." Below it, a blinking cursor invited him to enter a name. Another gimmick, Evan thought, leaning back in his chair. He decided to test it, typing the name of his grandmother, Margaret Hayes, who had passed away when he was 10. She was a kind but strict woman who believed in spirits and left Evan with cryptic stories of the afterlife. The screen flickered and a line of text appeared: "Connection established. Margaret Hayes is listening." Evan's heart skipped. It had to be a trick, a prank using public databases, or guesswork. But the room suddenly felt colder. He stared at the screen, unsure of what to do next. A chat box appeared with a blinking cursor waiting for his input. Feeling foolish but compelled, he typed, "Is this real?" The response was instant: "Yes." A chill ran down his spine. The logical part of his mind tried to dismiss it as a coincidence, but his fingers moved on their own. "Prove it." The screen froze for a moment, then displayed, "You used to sneak cookies from the jar when I wasn't looking. You thought I didn't know." Evan's breath hitched. It was true. As a child, he'd believed he was clever enough to outwit his grandmother, unaware she'd always caught on. His hands trembled as he typed, "How do I know this isn't a trick?" The reply was immediate. "You buried my rosary under the oak tree when you were 6. Dig it up if you don't believe me." Evan's mouth went dry. That was a memory he hadn't shared with anyone. At 6 years old, he had taken his grandmother's rosary during a tantrum and buried it in the backyard, afraid she'd scold him. Overcome with guilt, he'd never retrieved it. He stared at the screen, a storm of emotions brewing. Before he could type another question, a new message appeared. "Be careful what you ask for, Evan. You're not alone anymore." The lights flickered. Evan's laptop buzzed with static before the site closed abruptly, leaving his desktop eerily quiet. The room felt oppressive, the air heavy and still. Shaking his head, he shut his laptop and went to bed, convincing himself it was a hoax, a clever manipulation of data and human psychology. But sleep didn't come easily. Shadows danced on his bedroom walls, and faint creaks echoed through his apartment, though he was certain he was alone. The next night, he couldn't resist returning to the site. This time, he typed the name of his high school friend, Trevor, who had died in a car accident during their senior year. Trevor had been the life of the party, a daredevil who thrived on adrenaline. The site responded instantly. "Connection established. Trevor Collins is listening." Evan hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He typed, "Trevor, is this really you?" The reply came quickly. "It's been a while, man. Still overthinking everything, huh?" Evan's chest tightened. That was Trevor, always teasing him about his cautious nature. His fingers trembled as he typed, "How is this possible?" "You opened the door," came the reply. "Now it can't be closed." Evan frowned. "What do you mean?" The screen glitched, and Trevor's usual playful tone vanished. "You shouldn't have come here, Evan. You're in danger." A lump formed in Evan's throat. He typed, "From what?" "It's not me," Trevor replied. "It's them. The ones who follow. They're not like us." The room grew colder, and Evan's laptop screen flickered with distorted images, faces blurred and twisted, mouths agape in silent screams. The whispers began then, faint at first, but growing louder. They seemed to come from all around him, overlapping and unintelligible, like a dozen voices speaking at once. Evan slammed the laptop shut, but the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent. He spun around, his eyes darting to the corners of the room. Nothing. But the sensation of being watched was overwhelming. A knock at his apartment door made him jump. It was sharp and deliberate, echoing through the silence. He hesitated, every instinct screaming at him not to open it, but curiosity and fear drove him forward. He peeked through the peephole. No one was there. The knock came again, louder this time. His heart pounded as he slowly opened the door. The hallway was empty, but the whispers surged as if rushing into the apartment. He slammed the door shut and locked it, retreating to his bedroom. That night, he didn't sleep. The whispers didn't stop. They seemed to echo from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. When he finally dared to open his laptop again, it was already on. The ghost registry was open, and a single message awaited him. "You invited them in. Now they're here." A live video feed replaced the text. It was his apartment, filmed from an impossible angle as though the camera floated in the air. He saw himself, hunched over the laptop, pale and trembling. Behind him, in the shadows of the room, a figure began to emerge, tall, emaciated, and featureless, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. Evan spun around, but the room was empty. He looked back at the screen. The figure was closer now, standing directly behind his reflection. He felt the air grow colder, his breath visible in the sudden chill. The screen flickered, and the figure leaned closer, its featureless face filling the frame. The whispers stopped, replaced by a single guttural voice. "Run!" Evan bolted from his apartment, leaving everything behind. He didn't stop running until he reached the city limits, his mind racing and his chest heaving. For days, he stayed in a cheap motel, too afraid to return home. But the whispers followed him, faint at first, then louder, more insistent. When the motel staff found his room a week later, it was empty except for his laptop, which was still open. The ghost registry was on the screen, a single message blinking. Connection terminated. Story the end.
Story number 4.
It was midnight when Kayla's phone buzzed on her nightstand. She was already awake, scrolling through true crime forums, her usual way of unwinding after a long day. The notification was an email, its subject line vague and uninviting. "Explore the Veil." She clicked on it, intrigued but cautious. The message was simple. "Experience what lies beyond the living. We only accept those brave enough to seek the truth." Below it was a single link, followed by the words, "For invited eyes only." Kayla had been dabbling in the dark web for years, more out of morbid curiosity than anything else. She'd seen her share of scams, creepy chat rooms, and bizarre content, but this felt different. The message seemed tailored, personal, though it didn't include her name. Against her better judgment, she copied the link into her Tor browser and hit enter. The page loaded with a soft chime, displaying a stark white background and black text. "Welcome to the Veil. To proceed, we must know. Do you fear death?" There were 2 buttons, yes and no. Kayla hesitated, her finger hovering over the mouse. She clicked no. The screen faded to black and new text appeared. "Prove it." A video feed replaced the text. At first, it showed nothing but static, the kind that reminded her of old TVs with no signal. But then, the image sharpened, revealing a dimly lit room. In the center of the room sat a single chair, its wooden frame old and splintered. The chair faced away from the camera, but faintly, Kayla could hear someone breathing, slow, labored, and shallow. Her pulse quickened. It had to be pre-recorded. It had to be a setup. But the way the breathing fluctuated, growing louder and softer, felt too real. Then a line of text appeared over the video. "They want to meet you." Kayla leaned back, her instincts screaming to close the browser, but she didn't. Instead, she typed into the chat box that had appeared below the feed, "Who?" The response was immediate. "Those who came before. They know you now." The video feed shifted. The camera moved, or at least it seemed to, gliding silently to the other side of the room. The chair came into view. It wasn't empty. A figure sat slumped in it, its head bowed low, face obscured by stringy, dark hair. Its hands hung limply at its sides, and its clothes were tattered, soaked in something dark. Kayla leaned closer, her breath caught in her throat. She could see the faint rise and fall of its chest. It was alive. The chat box blinked. Ask them a question. Her hands trembled over the keyboard. Who are you? She typed. The figure on the screen stirred. Slowly, its head lifted, revealing a pale, sunken face. Its eyes were wide, hollow, and black, as though they had been burned away. Its mouth twitched, then opened slightly, but no sound came out. Instead, the chat box filled with text. I am waiting. Kayla froze. Her heart raced, and for the first time, she considered shutting her laptop and throwing it across the room. But something about the figure held her captive, as though it were pulling her in, demanding her attention. The camera zoomed in closer, capturing every horrifying detail of the figure's face. Its skin was stretched too tightly across its skull, and its jaw moved unnaturally, as though struggling to form words. The chat box blinked again. Do you want to see them? Kayla's stomach turned. She typed, almost against her will. See who? The figure's head tilted to the side, its neck cracking loudly in the process. The screen distorted, and for a brief moment she thought she saw shadows moving behind the figure. Shapes that didn't make sense, limbs too long, bodies too thin. The chat box responded, turn around. Kayla's blood ran cold. Her breath hitched as she stared at the words, her body frozen in place. Slowly, she glanced over her shoulder. The room was empty, just as it should have been. She let out a shaky laugh, scolding herself for being so easily spooked. When she turned back to the screen, the figure in the chair was gone. The room was empty now, the chair facing the camera. New text appeared. Don't ignore them. They're with you now. The video feed went black, replaced by a reflection of her own face. But there was something wrong with it. Her reflection didn't match her movements. While she sat motionless, staring at the screen, her reflection tilted its head and smiled. Kayla screamed, slamming the laptop shut. The room fell silent, but the sense of being watched lingered. She grabbed her phone, intending to call someone, anyone, but the screen wouldn't unlock. The only thing displayed was the same text. Don't ignore them. A soft knock came from her bedroom door. She lived alone. Her chest heaved as she backed away, her mind racing for an explanation. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by the sound of the doorknob turning. Kayla bolted for the window, throwing it open in a desperate attempt to escape, but when she looked down, the street below wasn't there. Instead, she saw the same room from the video feed. The chair sat in the center, empty, waiting. A voice whispered in her ear, low and gravelly, "It's your turn now." Kayla was never found. Her laptop, however, remained open on her desk, displaying the Veil's homepage. The single question blinked across the screen, waiting for the next visitor. Do you fear death? Story the end.
Story number 5.
Theo had always been intrigued by the idea of the dark web, even though he knew it was a dangerous place. A skilled hacker by day, he worked in cybersecurity, but at night, he'd often wander through the digital underworld, driven by the need to uncover the hidden things that most people would never dare seek out. He had seen it all, the illicit marketplaces, disturbing forums, and unsolved mysteries. But what kept him coming back wasn't the criminal activity or the horror stories. It was the search for something real, something that couldn't be explained, something beyond the boundaries of the physical world. One evening, after a particularly frustrating week of dealing with mundane issues at work, Theo found a link posted on an obscure forum. The message was cryptic. Find the doorway. It's waiting for you. Only the chosen can pass through. Below the message was a link with no description. His heart raced. There was no warning, no promise of safety, just an invitation. He had seen similar links in the past, usually hoaxes or links that led to dead ends, but something about this one felt different. The words, chosen and waiting for you, were strangely personal. He clicked the link. The page loaded quickly, and at first glance it seemed innocuous, just a blank white screen with a black box in the center. Inside the box, there was a single line of text, "Ask and it shall answer." Theo frowned. It was too vague, too simple, but his curiosity took over. He sat back, thought for a moment, and typed, "Who are you?" The response was immediate. "I am the answer you seek. I am the end you cannot avoid." Theo felt a shiver run down his spine. The cryptic responses weren't unusual on the dark web, but this one struck a chord. It didn't seem like a bot. The words were too deliberate, too meaningful. Still, Theo wasn't one to shy away from the unknown. He typed, "What do you want?" The text flickered before the answer appeared. "I want you to know what is hidden from your eyes. Do you seek the truth?" He paused. "Yes," he typed, feeling the weight of his decision settle over him. Another flicker and the screen changed. It now showed an image, a dimly lit room, its corners hidden in shadow. At first, Theo thought it was just a stock photo, maybe a generic background image used by the website. But as he stared, the room began to feel unsettlingly real. The furniture was old, the walls cracked, and the air was thick with a sense of abandonment. There was a door in the background, cracked open as if inviting him to come closer. A sound came through his speakers, soft, almost inaudible at first, but growing louder. A woman's voice, pleading. Theo froze. He recognized the voice. It was his sister, Emily. He hadn't heard from her in over 2 years, not since she had vanished without a trace. Police reports, searches, and countless unanswered questions had followed her disappearance, but there had never been any closure. His heart pounded in his chest. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, paralyzed by the mix of dread and disbelief. The voice was undeniably hers. He didn't type anything for a moment, too afraid of what might happen next. The screen changed again, this time showing a blurry video. The camera moved shakily, panning through the dark room. He could hear his sister's voice again, muffled by the sound of distant footsteps. "I can't get out. They won't let me." The video cut out abruptly, replaced by another message. "Will you save her?" Theo's hands shook as he typed, desperate to understand what was happening. "Where is she?" "The place beyond the veil. You will find the door, Theo." He stared at the screen. He knew about the dark web's bizarre claims and hoaxes, but this felt too personal, too specific. It couldn't be real, could it? But if there was even the slightest chance that his sister was still alive, he couldn't ignore it. He had to know more. He typed, "How do I find her?" The screen flickered again, the text replaced by a new message. "Follow the door. Enter the room." Theo's pulse quickened. The image of the room, the door ajar, was now burning in his mind. He felt an overwhelming urge to see it for himself, to know if the room was real, if the voice was truly Emily's. Against his better judgment, he stood up, grabbed his jacket, and left his apartment. He had no idea where he was going, but somehow the message felt like an instruction. He didn't stop to question it. His sister's voice echoed in his ears, and he needed to find the door. After a few hours of wandering aimlessly through the city, Theo found himself standing in front of an old building at the edge of town. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. The building was abandoned, its windows shattered, its doors hanging loosely on their hinges. It was the room from the screen. He wasn't sure why or how, but he felt compelled to enter. The air inside was thick with the scent of decay, and the floor creaked beneath his feet as he stepped deeper into the darkness. He moved cautiously, his heart pounding with every step. The room was empty, save for a chair in the center. A cold draft made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. In the corner, something shifted. A figure. Theo's breath caught in his throat as he slowly turned, his eyes locking on a woman standing near the wall. She was dressed in tattered clothes, her eyes wide and filled with terror. She looked so much like Emily, but there was something wrong, something unnatural about the way she stood, unmoving, her gaze fixed on him. He took a step forward. "Emily?" The woman's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Then, without warning, her face twisted in a grotesque expression of agony. Her skin seemed to stretch and warp, her eyes bulging as if the very fabric of her being was unraveling. Theo backed away, his heart racing. The room felt suffocating, as though the walls were closing in on him. He tried to call out, but no words came. His breath became shallow, his vision blurry. Then, everything went black. When Theo woke up, he was back in his apartment. His laptop was open in front of him, the same page from the dark web still displayed. The message blinked at him as though waiting for him to respond. "The door has been opened. The veil has been crossed. You cannot go back." His phone buzzed on the desk, a notification from the police. It read, "Missing persons report. Emily Parker, age 24, found deceased." Theo's body went cold. He He tried to call the number on the screen, but the call wouldn't connect. The room around him seemed to stretch and warp, the edges of his vision fading. The whispers began again, louder this time, swirling in his ears. "They are waiting for you, Theo. It's your turn now." He could hear her voice again, faint and distant. "Help me." Story the end.